My new book, The Art and Making of Fantasy Miniatures, is available now. Check out the link in the description to find out more. This is a review of The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the official illustrated movie companion, or more simply, The Making of Narnia. Although that's not actually how I think of it, this is definitely one of those books where knowing exactly what you're getting and making sure you're looking at it from the right angle is going to determine whether you really like it or really don't. Because it is a rather uneven book. It's written by Perry Moore, who is the film's executive producer, which I don't think I've ever heard of an executive producer writing a making of book, and thank God, because it sounds like it would result in the publicity piece from hell. Thankfully, Mr. Moore seems like he genuinely has tried to produce something of value. I think the best way to illustrate that and to provide a base for understanding what this book is and is not is to read his short author's note right at the beginning of the book. I think fans deserve something more personal than some press notes cobbled together with publicity photos. This book will be a little more personal, written from the perspective of someone who was there, someone who was proud to be part of it all. And I really appreciated this. It starts the book off on the right foot. He has clearly identified the weaknesses in other behind-the-scenes books and outlined a sound direction for his book. And while this is admirable, the more important part is, does the book live up to this promise? Well, yes and no. The great strength of this book is that it does feel very personal. It's got this warm, kind, intimate feel, like you're reading about this circus family making a home movie that just happened to cost $200 million. And this idea of it being more personal is on display throughout the whole book. In fact, the book almost feels communally authored in a way. There are a lot of voices and experiences being shared, not just the authors. There are long-form interviews, whole chapters written by the person or people who worked on that particular area of the film. Some highlights which were really novel in unique and interesting ways was extracts from the diary of Anna Popplewell, who played Susan. They're very short, and I wish they could have been expanded on, as I love the idea. As well as transcripts from Georgie Henley, who played Lucy. She had a tape recorder that she used to record interviews with people, as well as her own thoughts during filming. And these offer essentially nothing in terms of actual information about the making of the movie, and plenty of readers will think they're a complete waste of time and space. And I feel like I would be one of those people, except for the fact that I did enjoy it. It's quite unique, very endearing, and perpetuates that goal of having the book be more personal. However, that's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, and so the downside is that this book is not particularly information heavy. For a book this size, you'll learn surprisingly little in terms of how the movie was made and behind the scenes details. They exist, and there's some great interesting stuff, but that's buried beneath mounds of general surface level overview type information. And in that light, it does seem like the book is failing to live up to that promise of not feeling like standard production notes. One exception are the chapters towards the end on creature design and visual effects, which were really interesting, although that then does end up heavily contrasting how shallow much of the rest of the text is information-wise. The worst part of which is the insane amount of praise given to everyone talked about in this book. Constantly, every time someone is mentioned, it's just, oh, so-and-so is such a genius, the best, most talented person in the world, and the only person who could have possibly done whatever it was they did on the movie. I really can't overstate how much of this sort of insufferable ballyhoo there is in the book, because even if it's true, don't tell me they're a genius, show me. Prove it by talking about the specific work they did and let your reader decide how talented they are. I'm sure the compliments are genuine, but to actually endure it as a third party is an eye-rolling waste of time. It just comes across as laying it on really thick, like some sort of toady or hype man, or in this case, it's just like he's giving all his pals and co-workers an over-the-top pat on the back. An even worse area in which he doesn't live up to his promise at the start of the book is the number of stills, to the point that it feels like a perplexing lie that you would have an author's note calling out other books for using too many stills and then doing just that. It's crazy. Although I guess a possible defense could be, are there less stills compared to other making of books? Possibly, I mean, especially considering making of books at the time and earlier And nowadays, you still get plenty of books that are almost nothing but stills from the movie. Although I will say, however begrudgingly, that the choice and presentation of the stills in this book is rather nice. Certainly helped by the fact that visually this is an amazingly well realized movie. Speaking of which, my absolute favorite images in this book are the concept artworks. Genuinely some of the most beautiful art I've ever seen produced for a movie. The downside is there's not really a ton of it though. In fact, if I had been reviewing this book when it came out, that would have been my main complaint. Why couldn't they have got rid of all those stills and replaced them with more concept art, blah blah blah. However, the great thing on doing reviews on old books is the advantage of time, and thankfully there is actually another book called The Crafting of Narnia, which is much more like an art book for the first two Narnia movies, and will be the subject of a forthcoming review, so knowing there's a whole other book more focused on the art makes me feel a lot more lenient towards this book. Although another interesting thing is that many of the best production paintings are exclusive to this book. They don't actually appear in that Crafting of Narnia book, which may be particularly frustrating for people only interested in the art, but on the flip side, fans interested in both books will certainly appreciate the lack of overlap in the images. I should also briefly mention another making of type book that was released for this movie called Cameras in Narnia, which I won't be doing a review on. Some amazing photos, but very much written for children and just so tiny and short as to be completely pointless to anyone but the completest fan. But to wrap up the review on this movie companion, ultimately, the way I would describe this book is not being about how the movie was made, but rather what it was like making the movie, which is something I didn't think I would end up enjoying as much as I did, which is why, despite occasionally being a little underwhelming, and as long as you can adjust your expectations based on what you've seen and heard in this video, then I absolutely recommend it to any fans of the film.